This is LB Games, and welcome back to episode 2 of our RPG Maker MV plugin development series. In this video we'll be talking about RPG Maker, going into a bit more detail about it, talking about its history, looking at the editor for MV, just kind of getting you familiarized with things that are, all things that are RPG Maker. As I said in the previous video, if you are new to RPG Maker, make sure to watch this video. If you're not, if you've used it before, and you don't want to watch this, that's fine. You can go on to the next one, or the fourth one if you know coding, because the next one's geared towards teaching you how to do write JavaScript and all that kind of stuff, and understand programming and how things kind of work with that. Otherwise, let's keep going, and let's start breaking down some history. So, RPG Maker is not a new game engine. It's actually been around for a hell of a long time. It may have been around longer than most other game engines, to be honest. I don't think it was the first commercial public use engine, but it's been around for at least 30 years now, I think. The original version of RPG Maker came out in 1992. It was called RPG Scudodante, I think, 98 was the name of it. It was released in Japan on the it was the PC 9100, no, PC 9801, hence the name 98. And it's pretty limited, pretty basic. That's really all it needed to be. It's actually not technically, well, that's certainly the first RPG Maker, but actually RPG Maker came about through, essentially as a successor or was inspired by another, even earlier engine called Adventure Maker. This one was released, I think, in Japan, 1987. They used to have this magazine where they would post different applications or something, and in one of those magazines is the entire code base for this Adventure Maker program. So you would take that code base, you'd put it into the system that you used to make stuff with, and then you would run that to make the game. It was a really basic engine. I think it was just text-based. I'll link to if I can find the article again, I'll link to it in the description, and I'll have stuff up on the screen from this article I found a while ago on the history of RPG Maker. So we had Scudodante 98, and then next came RPG Maker 95, then 2000, then 2K3, XP, VX, VX Ace, MV, MZ, and then Unite's coming out in a couple of months here. So those are like the main. Think of those as like the mainline RPG Maker engines. There have been a lot of offshoots and things. There's been a couple that have been on consoles. There's one on the PS1, maybe even two on the PS1. There's a PS2 RPG Maker. There's an RPG Maker on the Switch. There's one for the 3DS. There are other ones like Pixel Game Maker. And there's like a lot of other small offshoot spin-off kind of ones that are made by the same developers. There are all in all probably about 30-ish different RPG Maker based engines out there now. So the early versions of RPG Maker up to 2003 were all kind of internal things. They're all black boxed. You didn't have any ability to do anything with them other than make the game with what you had available to you in terms of what features were in the engine, in the editor. Then when XP came along, that's kind of when there was a shift. RPG Maker XP came along with a new scripting system called RGSS, Ruby Game Scripting System. And that allowed you to actually have access to the code base for the engine. And this is the first engine where it was possible to write what would become plugins today, but to write scripts for and add your own functionality and modify the functionality of the engine. XP was the first engine, RPG Maker engine, that allowed you to do that. And that's probably one of the reasons why RPG Maker XP became, I'm not going to say like a well-known engine, but it kind of grew the cult of RPG Maker quite a bit. Even some of even some pretty good games that came out around that time that are still good today came out on RPG Maker XP, like To the Moon, for example. So that was like the first major shift, the first major kind of change that would kind of impact RPG Maker as an engine in a positive way. You had then VX and VX Ace that came out after that. I don't know what exactly they changed from XP, because I didn't use them. I do have them, I own them, but I never used them. What the differences between VX and VX Ace are, I'm not even sure. I'm going to assume that VX and VX Ace is kind of a similar situation to MV and MZ, where VX Ace is just like a slightly modified version of VX. That's a bit better. But I have to assume then also that VX and VX Ace combined are similar to similar kind of thing, where those are just improved versions of XP, maybe with some changes to the UI to modernize it, but then under the hood it's pretty much still the same, potentially. Then the second major shift that happened was RPG Maker MV. This is the engine that then allowed brought RPG Maker into JavaScript land, and that was a huge thing because while getting access to things through Ruby is okay, Ruby is not an accessible programming language by any stretch of the imagination. Not compared to something like JavaScript, anyway. JavaScript is a really easy language. Well, it's really easy for me, obviously, but it's definitely an easier language to learn than most. There are easier languages like VB.NET, which is almost plain text kind of programming. But as far as languages go, it's not hard to learn JavaScript if you have the right kind of mindset and you have some basic programming kind of sensibilities and principles sort of already in mind. You already kind of know some of the ways in which things can be done already. And even if you don't know any of that stuff, it's still pretty easy to pick up. It's a lot easier to learn than, say, C++ or C# as your first language. So that brought up a whole new realm of plugin development and people being able to do really crazy stuff. Towards the end of MV's, I don't want to say lifespan because MV's still going strong, but towards the end, before MZ came out, MV3D came out, and that's a plugin that allows you to basically make RPG Maker MV be 3D. It's a pretty wild thing, and it just kind of goes to show that you can do pretty much anything with RPG Maker MV, whereas with the older engines, you're really constrained to using Ruby and the existing code. The other thing that makes MV and MZ really modifiable is the fact that it's not only just running on JavaScript, it's running on top of a web runtime. So there's Node.js, NW.js, and Thiccc.js running in the background, kind of controlling everything visually and graphically and whatnot. and you can access that stuff directly to do stuff, like create your own windows without having to go through the normal window process and RPG Maker's base coding, engine coding. So it allowed really deep level access to things, and people with the ability to go in and want to go in and mess around with that stuff have been able to do some really insane things with it. MZ then is an engine. It is an engine. That's what it is. It is a micro incremental step up from MV. There's only really 3 things that MV doesn't do that make MZ better, and then there are a lot of things that MZ does that are true about MZ that make it not as good of an engine to start with, or to use, period, whether starting out or not. So the good things first. They did some efficiency upgrades to make the engine run faster, which is always good. 2, they replaced the skill animation system with particle effects. So you go into, I think they use Thiccccer. So you go into Thiccccer, you create your own skill animations there and export them, and then you just import them into RPG Maker MZ, and those become your skill animations. And every engine prior to MZ, the way that skill animations work is it's basically a GIF that runs when you use an attack. You have a bunch of different images that you put together to form the animation, and you can combine different animation tile sets, basically, if you want to call them that, frame sets together to make complex, more complex skill animations. But you have to do all that by hand. You have to go in and put in each frame that you want to have, modify them, and build the animation from scratch that way, as opposed to like an animation particle animation system where you can sort of automate a lot of the in-between stuff by just doing allowing keyframes to auto move and things like that. Like if you ever used After Effects, where you can say, oh, I want the opacity of this thing to be 100% here. At this point in the timeline, I want it to be 0%, and then in between those 2 points, After Effects will automatically start dropping the opacity, as you play through the footage you're looking at. A lot of animation and modeling programs these days do the same thing. They allow you to assign 2 points, and then it will automatically move those points based on what options you've changed. It will change those options as you go through it to arrive from point A to point B, without you having to do every little step yourself. Whereas with the old animation system that is used in MV and prior engines, you have to go through and do every single step yourself. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is that they brought back RPG Maker XP's map layering system. So in MV, one of the big changes they did was they moved to an automatic layering system, which is trash. There are all kinds of problems with it. Just with mapping, if you stack 3 different map tiles on top of each other, the bottom tile gets removed. And then in-game, in some places, what will happen is that the auto-layering system will actually break. And it's been this way since release. And they are not going to fix it. And I can show you examples when we do the mapping tutorial stuff, whatever time we do that. I'm not going to do that now. But I've started on stream before. I don't know if I clipped those or not, but eventually they'll make their way into the channel through the dev vlogs too. Maybe by then we'll be doing the mapping tutorial videos. But so yeah, it breaks in the editor, it can break in the game, and the only way to really fix it is to either create custom tile sets that merge the tiles together for the mapping part of it, and then also using events to display map tiles the proper way that they should be displayed. It's a really annoying problem, and wish there was, wish they had made the system correctly. The other problem with it is that you have no control over while you're mapping what you're doing. So as you're mapping, creating the map, you're putting down like the ground, then the next layer of things, so like trees and grass. Then you want to put in buildings. Then you realize, oh, I want to have this tree be behind, this building be behind this tree, or something like that. Well, you have to essentially remove everything below those couple of places and remap that section, because you can't just choose a layer to edit. You have to, everything's smashed together when you're mapping in the editor. So it's just a horrible system. And then bringing back the layering, the actual 5 layers of mapping that you can do, was a really good decision. Now, everything else about RPG Maker MZ is not any different than MV, or is only slightly different than MV, and is not worth the full price tag. MZ should have been either just an update to MV, not a whole new engine, or it should have been a discounted rate for those that had MV. They didn't do either. They charged full price for it. It was a quick cash grab. Maybe they needed some money to work on Unite. I don't know, but what I do know is that it's not worth buying MZ at full price, especially if you are going to be making a game in it. The reason for that is that plugins. So you can't really make a modern commercial game in RPG Maker without having a bunch of plugins. One of the only plugin developers that's making decent, making quality plugins at the moment is Visualstella, and they're making essentially like Yanfly level plugins for MZ. Yanfly was the plugin developer for well, not the plugin developer, but a plugin developer for MV that released essentially a plugin suite that allows you to redesign or like give a major facelift to the look of RPG Maker MZ or MV, and also gives you access to lots of new, and frankly what should have been in there from the actual developers, features like being able to equip more than just 5 types of equipment, being able to fully control how damage works, for skills, stuff like that. Well, Visualstella is that group for MZ, and they charge a hell of a lot of money for their plugins. To get the full suite of plugins that you might need to make a game and have all the functionality and features you would want to have, it could cost you anywhere from $200 to $500. So stupid expensive, increases the cost of entry a lot, and at least as of today when I'm recording this, that is true. There might be some more plugin devs that are around for MZ now, but as far as I know, it's still mostly Visualstella, which is part of why I'm making this plugin tutorial series, is to get more people interested in making plugins, and then hopefully they'll migrate over to MZ and help bring down costs by giving Visualstella a little bit of competition. And I'm going to eventually make my way over to MZ too and Unite. Unite is the newest engine they're working on right now. It's not out yet. It's going to be releasing in, I think, April. It's going to be interesting to see how they do this, because it's going to be there'll be a standalone on Steam, and I'm guessing that it'll just be the normal kind of editor that we're used to using. Maybe some updates here and there. The Unity plugin, though, is going to be a Unity plugin. It's going to integrate the tools into Unity and has some really interesting stuff with it. Like, for example, add-ons will be coded in C# now with the Unity plugin. I'm not sure about the standalone. I would have to assume the standalone would still be in C# because they're having to recode it for Unity. I don't see them maintaining 2 different versions of an RPG Maker. They use 2 different versions of code. So the new RPG Maker standalone could be in C#, which is interesting. Definitely increases the difficulty of making plugins, because C# is a big boy pants language. Not that JavaScript isn't a big boy pants language, but it's more big boy pants than JavaScript. and requires kind of a different set of tools to work with. Like you'll need an editor that can work with C#, and that's probably going to mean Visual Studio for most people, especially if they're using like the UI components in C# to do stuff, which could be interesting. Like if you could just make a menu in the C# visual editor instead of having to code out every little piece of it. Do the visual styling of it and the components you want to show on the window in the visual editor, and then just do the coding to fill those and process what happens and click on buttons. That'd be pretty interesting. I don't think they're going to do that because that'd be too smart of them to do. I don't have much faith in the people that make RPG Maker to do something like that. Most of the time in the past, what they've been doing is just essentially copy-pasting the code into whatever language it is, and they're not really copy-pasting it. They're redesigning it. They're converting it if it's going to a new language. But they don't add anything new, really. They make some changes here and there. Usually they're for the worse. And a lot of the jank that is in RPG Maker as an engine that's existed since the beginning is still there, because they don't really fix anything. Maybe that's going to change with Unite, hopefully. Maybe since they're going to be integrating with Unity, there'll be some level of standard they have to be held to, and they'll actually fix their crap for once. Not going to hold my breath until I see it, though. So that could be interesting. It could also just be a horrible mess and crash and burn. Not really sure what's going to happen. But so yeah, there's the history of RPG Maker from 1992 to 2023. Almost 30 years of RPG Maker. Or no, over 31 years of RPG Maker. So yeah, RPG Maker's been around a long time. People made a lot of games on it. It hasn't really broken through the commercial scene until recently. And there were some commercial games made back in the day, but they're few and far between compared to these days. So let's go ahead and switch over to looking at the editor for MV. So I'm not going to go too in depth on this because that's going to be what the eventing tutorial series will be about. It's kind of going through and really digging deep into the editor and what to do. But it's kind of going to go over the basics of the editor, talk about a couple minor things, and we'll leave it at that for this video. And we'll also get some of that while we're working on plugins too, because we'll have to build out demos that'll work. Show the plugins working. So let me open up the test project folder that I've made. So this is the editor for RPG Maker. Let me turn this off for now. Get this realigned. For RPG Maker MV. So general, it's kind of got some of the same things you see in any kind of application window. Got your menu bar up here, you get your toolbar, and then the map area, the map list, and then the tileset area over here. So let's go from top to bottom. You've got your new project button, open project button. Whoops, I'm going to click that. The save button, cut, paste, and cut, copy, and paste. The undo button. This only goes back about 20 undos or so be aware of that. Then you have these two buttons here. These two buttons change the mode of this central area. So this is the mapping view. And in this view, you can modify your maps. Like I can go in and add some things in if I wanted to here. Mapping is done using sprite tiles, which are in tile sheets, or tile sets as they're called. You have a couple different tabs down here you can use that have different tiles on them. They have different, the auto layering system puts them on different levels. Usually, and yeah, so what we're looking at here is the overworld tile set at the moment. You get about 5 or 6 with the RTP. RTP just is what they refer to as the default tile set. So that's pretty much that mode. You have some other tools up here too that are used in mapping mode, like the marquee tools that allow you to create squares or circular bits. And then the copy tool and the shadow tool, which lets you put shadows along things on the ground, on the A tile sets. for the most part. You can't put them on. All right, I think the okay, those are on A, but you can't put shadows over those. I think it's only ground tiles you can put shadows over. But it's meant to like be able to put in shadows for like buildings or walls or something. And then we have the event mode here. So in event mode, this is where you create all of your game events to like have cutscenes or create NPCs, to have enemies on your maps. So to go over this, the top here we have our buttons, so you can create a new event page by clicking on this. You can copy an event page and then paste it like that. You can remove event pages or then clear, delete event pages doing that button, and then the clear will remove everything from the event command pane over here. So you do have a note box on events, and some plugins might utilize this for things. And then you also have the name field. I would recommend you always name your events, just so they're easier to keep track of and find. Especially if you have like, if it's like part of a scene, and you have a couple different NPCs that are representing the same character, but they're like being used for different scenes within the same map. Highly recommend naming things at that point too, to make sure you know where they are and what potential cutscenes they're a part of. So in order for an event page to run, what's over here in the command pane, it has to match certain conditions. And that's what you set up over here. So if you have nothing selected, then that means that the page that you're looking at will always run. An important thing to be aware of is that if you have an event page like this, and it's the furthest to the right, no matter what other conditions you might have set on the other pages that might be matching, like if we're using a switch and that switch is turned on for this page, because this page comes before it, it will always run this page first, because event pages are processed from right to left. So if you're going to have a default page that's running when either some specific conditions aren't true or aren't met, or when certain things haven't happened yet, then you always want that to be the first page. So for the conditions, we have a couple different options here. You have switches. Switches are essentially just a fancy term for a thing that can be true or false. Can be on or off. So, like if you have a particular thing that happens, like the player opens a door, you can have that turn on a switch that says door opened, and then you can run other things off of that switch being on that then can do stuff with the game. Like for example, say if you open a door, you can make an NPC run into the room and say, "Hey, don't open that door," or fight the player, create like a battle from that. That's what you would use like this switch for. You have two of them, so you can have two switches that are required to be on, or you can have one that's on and one that's well, actually, yeah. If these are set, it has to be on in order for these to match. Now, the downside to this is that you only have two switches. There are some plugins out there that will allow you to make advanced switches. Specifically, I'm thinking of Yanfly's advanced switch and variable plugin. Essentially, what it does is it allows you to use some programming logic in the name for the switch, and then it takes that programming logic and evaluates it in the plugin, and if it all evaluates out to true, it'll turn the switch on. And then that switch, this one switch condition here can be used to check, 5, 10, 20, 30 switches if you want to, and then also add in like game variables and other programming language like function calls and things to get information back to check against. So you can use them to make your conditions a lot more robust, and it'll help fit, like if you have like a really complex idea for a game, it'll allow you to execute that. So variable in this case is not quite as useful in this conditions pane, just because you only can check if the value is greater than or equal to a number, the value of a game variable. Now, game variables can store any type of data, but you'll have to be aware of the fact that the conditions here only are checking for a number, and the same is true for the conditional branch event command. When you look at it here, the variable conditional branch option is also just a number or comparing to another variable. So at this point, if you're using another variable to compare against, you can have other types of data stored in a game variable. But you also have to then populate the game variable yourself through a script, advanced event command, or through a plugin or something. Because normally you would populate a game variable through the set variable or control variable option. You could use script, I suppose, but it's just easier to use the script box to just set it yourself, because sometimes this doesn't work the right way. But every other option you have in here is all going to come back to a number at some point. Even game data, it's going to be all kinds of just numbers. So just be aware of that. So this is the main way this is used is if you have a game variable tracking where you're at in your story. So like you say like a couple scenes happen and now your game scene tracker variable is 3. That means that scenes that happen after scene 3 can now happen, or events that can happen and be triggered after scene 3 can now happen. I don't generally subscribe to that because I think it's way too simplistic. I mean, you could use that in conjunction with switches, but then why use this at all? Just use the switches, and then get an advanced switch plugin to make your switches be more utilizable that way. So I mean, each to their own. I just don't see much use in using this for anything really, because it's to me, I've not been able to find a way to use it properly. Self switch is pretty useful. So this is a switch that you can set 4 of these on a particular event, and it only applies to this event. So normally what I'll use a self switch for is to prevent an event that's run automatically from running after it's done what it's supposed to do. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. For item, this will make the event run if you have a specific item, and actor, if you have a specific actor in your party, it'll allow you to run this as well. Now, in the case of these, it might be better to use the conditional thing again, conditional branch again for that, because if you want your event to do specific things, if you have a character, like specific dialogue for a character in your party, and you want to have dialogue for multiple characters, you would have to have then multiple pages, and the problem with that is that then you'd have to string together some sort of combination of switches to say, okay, this dialogue is done, now do this dialogue. Instead, what I would normally do is do a conditional branch tree that says, for this character, if they're in your party, show this dialogue or response, and then just for every character that would have a different reaction at a particular point, you would just add a new conditional branch checking for that character. So the condition panel is kind of limited. The most useful ones are self switches and switches. The rest are kind of, they have their applications, but they aren't really utilizable for a lot of things. Below that is the image. So this allows you to set the event sprite. So it can be a character, or it can be even map tiles. You can use map tiles on sprites. B and C and higher tabs, not A tiles, which is an important distinction, but you can use them. And in some cases you need to use them for doing some complex things. Some tiles can have animation on them, like these ones are all tiles that have animation at play, that can be played. You got your monsters for setting up on-screen battles and stuff like that, or at least on-screen encounters. Next to it is the movement panel. So for the type, fixed means that the character doesn't move; he'll just stay in place. Random means they'll move in a random direction. Approach means they'll approach the player, and custom means you can set up a custom route. Again, custom routes in this particular panel don't have a lot of utilization. You can't really utilize them in a lot of situations. It's mainly for characters that should have specific routes, like maybe if they're on a patrol or something, like an enemy that you can have react to the player being in their sight range or something like that. Otherwise, if you're dealing with cutscenes, you should use the move route command, event command from page 2 instead, because that allows you to set up move routes for the events, for any event you want to, within the cutscene. Below that, the move type is move speed, so when they do move, they'll move at this rate of speed. Most NPCs are set to slower, which is a little bit slower than normal, and it allows them to not get in the player's way quite so much. Then you have frequency. This is the rate at which they move. So this is the speed, and this is the rate. So the higher the rate, the more they will be moving around. So if you want to make a hyper NPC, set it to highest and watch them go. So they'll be all over the place. So the next couple panels are priority and trigger. So for the priority, this is the how the player will interact with the NPC or with the event. If it's set to same as character, then the event will block the player from passing through it. You can, if you're touching the event, on the edges of the tile, you hit enter, the action key, to interact with it. Well, depending on the trigger, I guess. For below characters, the event is able to be passed over, so the character can walk over it. So you would use these for like setting up some kind of like floor trap or something. Or the most common use for these is for map transfer events. And then you have above characters, which makes the event render above the character and they pass underneath it. And actually, the character spread is blocked out by it, so they're literally behind it. This can be useful for certain situations, but you won't normally use it much. If you want to if you want to try and build something like a tunnel or a section of the map you can travel underneath, you'll have to use events to essentially put the map tiles in, and then those event tiles will be set to above so that your character goes underneath them. And then we have the trigger box here. This is how the player can trigger the event to happen. So action button means you hit enter, or whatever action is mapped to will cause the event to happen. Player touch means as soon as the player is touching the event, either by running into it or running over it or under it, the event will trigger. Event touch is a bit broken. People claim it's not broken, that it's supposed to work this way. I'm calling BS on that because player touch works in an entirely different way, and there's no reason why event touch should not work the same way. But what event touch is when the event touches touches a character, the player character, the event is triggered. Now, there's a stipulation to that, and that is by default, that can only happen when the priority of the event that's moving to the player that has the event touch trigger turned on or set has to be set to same as character. I wrote a plugin called the Improved Event Touch plugin that essentially removes all the restrictions, so you can do it with any priority, but by default, without a plugin, you only can use this when you have same as character selected. And then we get to the kind of dangerous ones. So autorun. Autorun makes an event run automatically. Normally we'd use this for things that run in the background of the map, like if you need to set up some stuff for your game when you're first starting, if you want to have a cutscene run when you first enter a map, anything where the player shouldn't be able to move around while it's going on. That's what you would use an autorun for. The danger with that is that if you don't stop the autorun from running, it continues to run automatically. Essentially will seemingly make the game seem like it's frozen, but it really hasn't. If you've played an RPG Maker game before, and just all of a sudden the game freezes, chances are you've run into a situation where the developer didn't switch off an autorun, and there's just something running in the background and preventing you from doing anything. And like I was saying, I usually use a self switch for that, so like have an autorun set, it'll be doing stuff. I'll use the set self switch or control self switch event command, and then I'll have a page where we have self switch turned on for the conditions, and then I'll have the trigger just be action button. And that way this will run and do its thing, then it'll turn itself off. Parallel is kind of the same, a little bit different though. So parallels with certain event commands can cause the same kind of problem that auto runs do. Like if you're showing text or anything where the player has to interact with something like a window, a parallel will lock the game up. If you're not doing that, if you're just doing other things, parallels allow you to run stuff in the background while the player can still move around and do stuff. So parallels are pretty good for like doing cutscenes or handling certain things like if you need to set up if you have a day-night cycle you want to put in your game and you want to transition from day to an evening kind of time as far as like the lighting goes or as far as the look of the map goes, like with a tint or something, you would use a parallel for that to have it happen while you're allowing the player to move. Again, with parallels, you want to make sure to turn them off when you don't need them anymore. Not so much these days, but back in the past, a lot of parallels running at the same time could cause the player's computer to lag because it's not, and Architecture is not the best performance of engines. But these days it shouldn't be that much of a problem unless somebody's playing a game on a really old clunker. Most systems these days can handle a decent amount of parallels happening at the same time. Then these other things down here, these options, are for what happens with the sprite. So if you have walking turned on, when the sprite is moving, it will have the walking animation. If you have stepping turned on, when the NPC is stopped or the sprite is stopped, it'll still look like it's walking. So if you've seen like in older RPG games where the characters are standing in place and like looking like they're walking around, that's what that allows it to emulate. Direction fix prevents the character, the sprite from changing direction when it's moving. So if the sprite is facing downward with this turned on and then it moves up or moves left, it'll stay facing downward but move that direction. And then you have through, which allows you to make the sprite move through things that normally wouldn't be able to pass through. So like if you want to make a ghost NPC that can pass through walls, you would turn on this through and then be able to pass through impassable terrain and other objects that normally would prevent it from moving through them. So that's this portion of the window over here. This is your command pane. Mentioned a couple different times. All the things you can do in events happen over here. You've got 3 different pages of stuff too. You'll be mostly working with the message section, the game progression section, the flow control, movement, and potentially also screen and audio. The next ones that are most likely you'll be working with are probably going to be the scene controls and the party and actor sections. But the really interesting stuff in this is these 2 down here. So the script event command allows you to actually write JavaScript and run it from an event. Now there are some problems here, mainly that you don't get much room. So a script box is 11 lines long, and once you use that up, you're done with that box. You can't have one box flow into another box. So if you have 2 script boxes, you set up some code in one and continue it in the next, you're going to get errors because that code that you've written in the second box isn't going to be combined with the first box. Now you can get around that by what's called minifying code, and that allows you to essentially take any length of code that you have and convert it down into a single line. And it does that by doing a lot of really complex things and enhancements to what you've written for your code. It also makes it so you can't really modify it very easily either. So if you're going to use the script box to write some JavaScript stuff for like maybe an invented system or something like that, just be sure to keep a non-minified version of your code around so you can make changes if there are problems or add new stuff in if you want to do that at some point. An example of how I've used this, my fast travel system is built in this for my game, and I also have like a Zelda-style rock push puzzle system where I define which map cells are valid map cells for you to move the rock to, and it's all handled through a script box that runs when you're moving things around. So you can do a lot of stuff with the script box here, and a lot of things. It's like it's a in between writing a full plugin and not using custom coding at all. And then we come to the plugin command box. This is what we'll be working with a lot in this series. This allows you to call a plugin command that you define for a plugin to have your plugins do things. So like if we want to open up a shop window. If we create like a custom shop plugin, you can do that with this. If you want to disable a particular option in a plugin you made, like you want to prevent the player from opening a particular submenu from your plugin, like because you want it disabled for story reasons or something, you can set that up in here. If you want to change like the kind of items you're allowing to be used for a currency for your plugin, you can do that with these. You can do a lot of stuff with plugin commands. You can pass in a lot of different parameters. I made a bank plugin that uses an ungodly plugin command, super long, to like set up new investment kind of things. Like you deposit a certain amount of money, and then over a certain amount of time will pass, and then you essentially trade in that deposit slip, and you get back a certain amount of money. And the process to set up one of those is pretty insane with this, but you can do all kinds of stuff with this. It's almost as utilizable as just plugins themselves. And that is the event editor here. So let's go ahead and switch over to the database. Yes. So lots of stuff to talk about here as well. So database is where all of your game data is created and stored at. You can see we have the actors thing that opens up by default. This is where you put all your characters in. You got your character information up here. Your max level, minimum level, the weapons and equipment they get when they start, the images that are being used for that character, the traits. So if you want to have like a character that has a like half damage to fire, you can set that up in this trait section over here. Then the note type box, which note type box is very important for plugins. And so then we have classes. Classes allows you to define all the different things about your different classes. You got your name, the XP, and parameter curves. These are all very restrictive in RPG Maker because you really can't. The way in which these curves are generated is all built into the editor, right? So you can't easily change these after the fact. I will be making a plugin eventually that will allow you to do custom ones of these. Essentially what it'll be is it'll be a plugin that you can plug in, you can pop in parameters for, and it'll give you a little more control over these curves than you have now with the editor. But it won't be anything too insane. You got your class traits over here, so the reason that these are always given to every class is because you need these for the class to actually be able to do anything. So like all these extra parameters are 0 by default, and if you don't set them, then you won't be able to have any kind of hit rate, there won't be any criticals, won't be able to evade or anything like that. If you don't give them a skill type, they can't use abilities that are tied to the skills that are tied to that skill type. And then the equipment and weapons that they should have by default, you have to allow them to equip that type of weapon and armor, otherwise they won't be able to equip it. So some important stuff there. Again, you got the note type box down here, your skill list, so it's the skills and then the level they can learn them at. And then skills are next, so we got our skill pane here, all the general information's in the middle here, attack description, skill type, the costs associated with using the skill, the scope, so essentially what you can target with your skill. You can't target every character. You can target all enemies or all allies. You can't target a mixture of them without using a plugin. And then the times at which you can use the skill. Invocation stuff down here. So the speed at which you can cast the spell. Messing around with this can allow you to make the spell take longer to cast. So you can make more powerful skills and spells take longer to use. The success rate. The number of times the attack will be repeated when it's used, and then the TP gain you'll get by using it. Hit type determines what type of calculation and the parameters that are used for determining if you hit your enemy or not with the skill. A certain hit just means it always hits. And then the animation you're going to use when you use the skill. Message it that'll show when you use it, the required weapons to use the skill, if you need any, the damage stuff up here, so the type of damage, the element of the damage, and then the formula for the damage. If there's any damage variance. So what this means is that you'll have a range of damage. It won't always do the same damage every time. Whatever this evaluates to, it'll be plus or minus 20% of that value, essentially, is what that means. And then if the ability can critical or not. Then you have an effects section down here. It's kind of similar to traits, but you have less stuff you can access with this. It allows you to add a couple things in to make your skills add things. Normally what you'll use that for is for either common events or for status effects. And then the no-take blocks as well. For items, pretty much the same as skills. The only thing different is that we don't have the section down here, and there's a few different items in the general settings. Otherwise, pretty much the same. One thing to note is that you can't add item types, so if you want to add custom item types, you'll have to use a plugin for that. Or you'll have to figure out a way to do it through events, through like using a game variable to store certain things and then eventing it out, which I wouldn't recommend because that would be pretty annoying to do. It's definitely a thing that a plugin would be useful for. So for weapons, we've got the traits panel is back. You got your general information here, the weapon type, the animation that is played when you attack with the weapon, and then you have the parameter changes. So this is the parameters that get added to your character's other parameters when they equip the weapon or armor. And armor is the same thing as that, just different name on some things. So enemies. This is where you create your enemies at. You have your enemy information here, your enemy stats, the sprite that's used, the rewards for killing them, the items that get dropped, their attack patterns down here, which are the attack pattern system down here is pretty limited. You only can have one condition. There are some plugins that you can use to make more complex attack patterns, but it is definitely a thing you have to have a plugin for, which is unfortunate. And then the no-take blocks again. So troops are what you make to put into maps as encounters, random encounters, or for on-screen encounters that you run from the start battle event command. So you take your enemies you made, you throw them into troops, you arrange them, whether you're doing a front-facing system, battle system, or a side view system, and then you can add in some battle events that happen down here. Likewise with the other thing like I mentioned, well actually not likewise, this one does allow you to do multiple conditions, so you can have some more complex logic here. Like if I wanted to have an event happen at the end of a turn by the 6th turn I want it to happen, and then every 3 turns after that it will happen. You can do this setup here, and what will happen is that on the 6th turn this will run, then on the 9th turn, the 12th turn, 15th, and 18th turns until infinity, or until the battle ends, technically. This event page will be run. Of course, you have to set it to turn mode, first of all. In order for this to run every turn, and not just the first time it matches these conditions, you have to use turn, which allows that to happen on a turn-by-turn basis. Battle means that this event page only runs once. And moment means that as soon as these conditions are met, the page gets run. And will run as long as those conditions are met. I actually have a really interesting scripted system in my Codex plugin demo for a boss that implements an elemental shift phase where you do an attack with magic and that enemy will switch to that element type after a bit. And then use an entirely different skill set using a plugin that I have called Battle AI, the Battle AI plugin from Yanfly. So you can do some pretty interesting stuff with this. You can create like systems that track kills. You can create interesting boss battles. And this is like you have full access to all the event commands from here. So the next tab down is the states tab. This is all your status effects. So you got your general settings, removal conditions, messages, traits again, and notes over here. So for general conditions, you have your some of the things that are different in here. Restriction. This is what happens when the state is applied. What the character can do or can't do. So if there are no restrictions, they can do whatever they want to do. If you have like attack an enemy, then that's kind of similar to a rage stats effect, the berserk stats effect. Attack anyone's kind of like confusion. Attack an ally, that can be charmed, like a charmed status effect. And then cannot move is like if you get knocked out or you're paralyzed or bound somehow. The character can't act. Priority is important as well. So what priority does is it says that whatever skill has the highest priority value, that effect's icon gets shown over the character. So if you have a stats effect that's really important for the character to know about, like say you have something like Death Sentence from FF7, where it's a countdown and then once you reach the end of that countdown the character gets killed. Yeah, probably a good idea to show the icon for that stats effect to the player as opposed to telling them that they're poisoned. Because the poison may or may not kill them, but the Death Sentence stats effect will. So that allows you to like essentially say that certain stats effects need to be told. The player needs to know that the character has them on them. There are some plugins you can get to modify the battle UI to show all the stats effects that the character has, or at least a couple of them, down in the character information. But that doesn't happen by default, I don't believe. Then you have the SV settings. So those are side view settings if you're using side view battle. This is the motion. So when the character has a stats effect applied to them, what motion do they use, and the overlay to show on the character for whatever stats effect you have. Both of these are both hard-coded lists. To add anything new in that's not in these, you'll need a plugin to do that. Removal conditions are how the status effect gets removed. Move it into battle means that when the battle's over, the status effect is removed. Removed by restriction means that if you have another stats effect that gets applied that has a different restriction than the one this one has, this one gets removed. So, like for example, if you have if you're berserked or something enraged, and you have the attack an enemy selected for that effect's restriction, and then the character gets paralyzed, you would probably normally have this checked so that when the character gets paralyzed, they no longer are affected by rage, because they can't move or anything at that point. For timing, if this is not set, then you have the only way. If this isn't set, the only way you can remove a status effect is through items or by doing damage. Otherwise, you won't be able to remove a status effect by in battle without one of these two settings, or without an item to heal it, or a spell to heal it, or something like that. So this allows you to set whether or not the action the effect will end at the end of a turn or the end of an action. So, end of action means the character does something, and then right immediately after they finish what they do, if an effect hits 0 on the timer, it will be removed. What end of turn means is that at the end of the battle turn, then the effect is removed at that point. And down here, these get enabled, and this lets you set the number of turns, or a range for a number of turns, to be randomly selected for the effect to be applied for. So if you have 1 to 1, that means that it's going to be 1 turn, but if you have like 1 to 10, it'll be a random number between those 2 points. So it could be anything from 1 to 10. And that'll be the number of turns the effect is applied for. Removed by damage means that when the character is damaged, there's a certain percentage chance that the effect is removed. This might be something like for maybe like sleep, where you set this to maybe 25%. So 1 in 4 hits will cause sleep to be removed. And then removed by walking is for when the effects don't end at the end of battle, but you want to have them be removed over time. You set this, and then after the character does the certain number of steps, the effect gets removed. This stuff shows when the effects are doing different things at different points through the battle. And then you get your notate box down here as well. So animations, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Animations. So this is where you get your animation stuff set up. you will spend a lot of time in here just making things, because it takes a long time to build these out. This is a fairly decently long one there. So yeah, all the animations are done frame by frame, and you add your item images, your images, skill animation images into there, and you manipulate them over those frames to create the animation. Very time-consuming process, but still kind of cool, and allows you to do some interesting things and add some variety to your game as well, as opposed to using all the default stuff. And yeah, you can have up to 2 image sets that you use to build these from. So you can import your own animation images if you want to. There are some DLCs on the Steam store that give you more, and some more high quality looking ones as well. Tile sets, this is where all the tile set stuff happens. You can add new ones in here, you can modify existing ones. As you can see, for the overworld tile set, we don't have 3, 4, or 5 tiles for those, because this tile set type doesn't use them. But you also have some other tab ones there, like D and F that aren't, or D and E that are not filled, and you can fill those if you want to. So you have world type, and then you also have area type. Area type has more options, like the A tab has more stuff to it. In A tabs, I guess here too, these are auto tilers as well. So for the beginning of the A tab on both of the different types, different modes, those tiles are actually a grouping of larger tile groups, and they're essentially compressed down to one tile when the engine loads them in, and it will allow you to automatically tile an area around depending on what's adjacent to a particular edge. So it allows you to quickly and easily map out like a lake or something, or add in certain types of terrain and have it be connected and be continuous, congruent with itself, without having to have you map every single tile out the way it should be. You also can deal with passability stuff over here. So passage means whether or not you can just walk over the tile at all. Passage for directional sets up the directional based passage. So while you might be able to walk over, through, or at least pass through a tile, you can set this as well to then control what directions you can move over that tile. Ladder allows you to set which tiles will cause the character to face that tile when they're walking on it. So like simulate going up and down the ladder or a rope or something like that. Bush allows you to, if you have a certain tile that doesn't cover the entire bottom of the tile that it's in, it's possible that the character sprite can show up underneath through the bottom of that tile. Bush allows you to essentially what's called call the bottom half of or bottom section of the character tile, so that doesn't happen. Essentially, it just doesn't render it. Counter allows you to set up a particular tile to be to allow you to essentially interact through it to an NPC. So like if you have a shop and you have an NPC shop owner, normally what you would do is you'd put the shop owner NPC sprite NPC event in to get the sprite in, then you have an interactable event to do the actual shop stuff and allow you to converse with like the shopkeeper. That would be on the counter that the player would interact with directly. What this option allows you to do, though, is set a mapping tile that allows you to interact with it, and then if there's an event on the other side of it, it essentially triggers that event, as opposed to you having to do 2 events. So, kind of useful. Damage floor, this allows you to set up if floors can do damage to your characters. It doesn't allow you to set the amount of damage, though, so I think that's a hard-coded value somewhere. And then finally we have the terrain tag. This is pretty much just a thing used for evented systems and for plugins. It doesn't really have any purpose other than that. Next up are common events. Common events are a very, very powerful tool that you can use. Normally what you'll use them for is if you have something that you do a lot through events in multiple places, you would essentially move that out to a common event and then call the common event from those other events. Like, what I've used this for in the past has been like for really complex event logic that I don't want to just have hanging around in events on a map. or for situations where, like my rope climbing system, where I need to be able to allow the player to walk up or down a rope depending on, or climb up or down a rope depending on which end of the rope they're on. So what I just did was I set up some game variables to set up a couple different states and then track whether they're at the top or the bottom of a rope, and then in the common event, those game variables will cause different groups of event coding to run depending on what those are. So instead of having to say, like, on every top end of a rope have a whole thing of events that happens, I can just say, okay, set this variable to 1, then call this common event, and in the common event, if this variable is equal to 1, that means we're at the top, so we're going to go down, and we'll go down so many things, or there'll be some other kind of processing. So common events are very powerful. They allow you to do lots of things. Something you should get familiarized with as well, because they can make your life a lot easier. So you can either call common events from an event or from a skill, or you can have them trigger based on a switch. For common events, you either have parallel or auto-run, and the same things that apply to these when used for triggering events apply for these for when they trigger common events as well. Auto-runs will lock up the game if they're not ended, and parallels can lock up the game depending on what you do down here, and then you get the full access to all the event commands here. Or they'll just run in the background continuously and potentially cause some lag. And then you set the switch that will then trigger this to run. None just means there's no trigger, and they're manually. That means this common event's manually run from somewhere. The system tab allows you to set up a bunch of different information in different settings. You can set up, like, if you're going to use have experience given to reserve members in the party, or if you want to use a side view battle system. You can set up your the skill types that have a chanting effect on them in side view mode, your different vehicle images, your currency, abbreviation, the starting party, a bunch of different sound settings, all kinds of things. You can even disable menu commands if you don't want to have certain things available, like if you don't want saving at any point, you can disable saving from here. Types is where you define all the different types of things. So elements, skills, weapons, armor, and equipment. Again, for equipment types, you can add new types, but you can't equip those equipment types with the other ones. So you can add another equipment type, like a 6th equipment type, but you can't use it for anything in, like, the starting equipment or for the character equipment. Extra, that is. Like, I can't create, like, a ring equipment type and then have, like, a ring slot added to the character equipment configuration, because that's a hard-coded thing. There's only 5. Now, if you get Yanfly's, there are plugins you can do this with. The one that I use is Yanfly's item, not item core, but equip core. Allows you to define a custom number of equipment slots per character. So you can have a certain character have a certain number of slots. So maybe you have a character that has 7 slots, and they have the ability to equip a bunch of accessories. Another character might have 6 and only be able to equip 1 accessory, and you can, like, tie that to story-related reasons and things. So something to be aware of with that. For all the other stuff, though, you can do whatever you want to, because they're not tied to anything like that. And again, there are no item types here either, so it's kind of unfortunate. There never have been either, which is very annoying. And then the last tab is just defining a bunch of different string text variables that will display the text for various things in the game. Like, you can call levels something else if you want to. You've got a bunch of different text that's shown at different points in the game for different things. You can change how these work. And that's pretty much all there is to the database. Next up is the plugin manager. We'll be using this a lot in our tutorial series here. This is where you will add plugins to your game, and you will configure them through the parameters over here. pretty much all there is to this. Not really anything special, but it is one of the more for how simple it is. It's insane how much stuff it can add to your game with the plugins. The rest of the stuff up here, we have the sound test panel where you can run all these different types of sounds and test them out. You have your event searcher, so you can search by variable, event name, or switch number, and find the maps that they're used on. Not quite as useful as MZ's event list panel when you're in event mode, but it's better than nothing. And then we have the resource manager where you can import different resources to your game. So if you have new tile sets or new music to add, you can import them to this. And then we have the character editor, or the character creator. I would recommend using Schlangen's character gen because it's a lot more accessible than this and a lot easier to set up. And also allows you to do certain things you can't do here, like change the position of facial features. You can't do that in this editor, but this is still a good way to make custom characters. And you can add custom character creator pieces, generator pieces, to even add more variety as well. So yeah, pretty useful tool. If you don't know pixel art, you can't do pixel art very well. And the final thing here is the playtest button. You click on this, you can playtest what you have so far in your game. So outside of that, you have your map list down here where all your maps are shown. You can double click on a map to click on a map to open it. Right click to show a bunch of different things here. So you can generate a dungeon. I would recommend doing that on it'll generate a dungeon for a new map, I think. Or I would say create a new map, then use that. I think it overwrites what's in it. Let's just see real quick. Yeah, so it uses the tile set. Yeah, so it has to be an existing map. And then you can choose to add in some options. And it'll generate a map for you, given that you have enough space for it to do that. Doing that is not undoable. Be aware of that. If you do that, you will overwrite whatever's in the map, and you'll have to remake it if you need to remake it, if you did it by accident. Let's see what else is there. You can save an image. Allows you to essentially take a small image of your map and save it to somewhere on your computer for things. You can shift a map over a certain number of tiles with this. You can find maps with that. You can delete, copy, and paste. And then you have your edit, load, and I'm not sure what load does. Okay, so you can actually load in example maps with this. Cool. I didn't even know this was here, to be honest with you. So that's pretty cool. Oh wow! So this is where this map came from. One of the game devs I watch a lot of on Twitch, Mao Game Studios has a game called Familia, and I was looking at this. I was like, the map looks familiar, and he actually just took this map, a sample map, and did a bunch of modifications to it to make his one of his first maps for his game, which is perfectly fine. But yeah, so you can do that to load up sample maps, or if you have other maps you want to load in, you can do that. You can click on edit to edit your properties for a map. So you got your name, you got your display name, will just show up in game. You have the tile set you're going to use, the width and the height for the map, the scroll type, so if you run to an edge, how that will interact, like you make it loop over certain directions. The number of encounters average for you to, or number of steps average for you to run to an encounter. The music that will play and the sound that will play in the background. If you have a parallax, you want to have a parallax background, you can do that. And what this does is it puts something behind the map, so any tiles that are not filled in will have this image. And you can use this to like show, I think most of the time when this is used, it's to fill in behind a map if you're up in the air, to kind of show that there's something below you. And those can be made to loop and scroll as well. And then you have your encounter list over here. we'll talk about it in a minute, but if you want to restrict certain enemies to certain regions of your map, you'll use the region system to do that, and specify a region ID down here for where those will spawn at. Otherwise, they'll just spawn everywhere in the entire map. And the weight is the likelihood that you'll run into this troop when you get an encounter. So that's the map panel there. When you create a new map, it's the same panel. Just there's no information already in there. And then we talked about this map tile thing over here already a little bit. We got different tabs for different tile sets, and then you have this one called R. This is for region. So what regions allow you to do is allow you to define different areas in your map, and you can do different things based on that. So like for example, I could set up a region over here and make that region spawn specific enemies, or if I have a couple of different plugins, I could set up regions that allow you to walk over certain tiles that like essentially override passability. So I could essentially have like a chest over here or something that you can see and don't know how to get to, and there could be like a hidden or invisible path to get over to this area to get to it that I could set up using plugin like that. And Yanfly has one. I think there's a couple other people that have plugins like that. So you can do a lot of things with regions. I use it mainly for separating encounters and making sure that I can have certain enemies in certain places, or have no encounters at all in certain places if I have a specific, like I'm going to put in like a story reason thing for that. Like in my first map, if there's guards around different points in the map, guarding entrances and exits from it, and around a certain area around them, there aren't any encounters because ostensibly they are killing any monsters that come near those places. So there wouldn't be any encounters in those areas. That's what I'm using the region system for, is to define where in the map there are encounters, and where there aren't any, there won't be a region set up for it. But yeah, so that's the editor for the most part. There are some other things to talk about, but that's pretty much the gist of it. And the rest we'll cover while we're working on plugins or in some of the other tutorial series. So if you have any comments or questions, leave them below. We'll answer them if possible. I managed to get this down 30 minutes. Usually, or actually, no, 25 minutes. Usually this is taking about an hour and 45 minutes to finish. So I've gotten it down a bit, which is good. Yeah, leave them below and I'll get to them, get to answering them if I can. And then I will see you in the next video, where we'll be talking about JavaScript. Or if you're going to skip over that one, we'll be doing then the first plugin. But yeah, until then, this is LMP Games, and I will catch you guys later.